Snow pressed against the cafe windows like the world was trying to get in or keep something out. I wasn't supposed to be there that afternoon. My shift had ended early. My daughter was at dance class, and for the first time in weeks, I had an hour to breathe. That's when I saw her. Not the confident woman from the office, not the one who always had everything under control. Just a woman sitting alone, shoulders shaking, trying not to fall apart. I almost walked away, but something in me refused. So I said one honest thing, and everything changed. The alarm went off at 5:45, same as every morning. Darius Mitchell lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the wind press against the bedroom window. Chicago in January had a particular kind of cold. Not just weather, but a weight. It settled into the walls, into the floor, into the marrow of things. He got up anyway. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen where the overhead light flickered every time the heat kicked on. He'd been meaning to fix it for 3 months. He heated water for oatmeal, packed a lunch he'd prepped the night before, turkey and mustard, an apple, a small bag of crackers, and then padded down the hall to Naya's room. She was 6 years old and slept like she was trying to take up as much space as a person could reasonably occupy. Both arms flung wide, 1 foot hanging off the mattress. Thick dark curls spread across the pillow like a halo that had given up on symmetry. Darius stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he needed to. She's okay. That was the thing he told himself every morning. Whatever else was complicated or unfinished or exhausting, she was okay. "Morning, baby," he said softly. "Time to get up." She made a sound that was approximately 30% word and 70% animal complaint. "I made oatmeal with cinnamon." One eye opened. And brown sugar. Both eyes opened. That was the deal. By 6:30, they were out the door. Nia bundled in a coat 2 sizes too big because she'd grown fast this winter, and the new one he'd ordered hadn't arrived yet. He buckled her into the back seat of his 2011 Civic, which started on the 3rd try, as it always did in cold weather, and he sat for a moment while the engine coughed itself awake. His dark brown hands were dry, skin cracked at the knuckles. He kept forgetting to buy lotion. Or rather, he kept remembering at the exact moment he was doing something else. The drive to Nia's school took 12 minutes. She talked for 9 of them about a book she was reading about penguins. Specifically about how penguins huddle together for warmth and take turns standing on the outside of the huddle so no single penguin gets too cold. "They're fair," she said. "Nobody has to be cold the whole time. They take turns." "That's a good system," Darius said. "I think people should do that." "Do what?" "Take turns being on the outside." He didn't say anything for a moment. Just kept his eyes on the road and the snow and the gray light that hadn't quite decided yet whether it was morning. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think you're right." He dropped her off, watched her run toward the entrance where her teacher was holding the door open, and then sat in the school pickup lane until the car behind him honked gently. He'd been doing this for 3 years alone. The divorce, if you could call it that, when there was so little to divide, had been quiet in the way that some endings are. Not loud and dramatic, but gradual. Rochelle had met someone in Portland, had been unhappy in Chicago for longer than either of them had admitted, and one spring morning, she'd been honest about it in a way that almost made Darius grateful because at least it was over. She sent cards for Nia's birthday. She called when she remembered to. She was not a villain in this story. She was just someone who had wanted a different life. Darius had not wanted a different life. He had wanted the one he'd thought he was building, but here he was. He worked as a project coordinator at Westfield Analytics, a mid-sized firm that processed data for regional insurance clients. Not glamorous work, steady work. He was good at keeping things organized, at catching the details other people skimmed over, at staying calm when the systems started behaving badly. His manager, Dennis, called him the team's quiet anchor. Darius didn't know if that was a compliment or a description. His coworkers were generally fine. He knew who took the long lunches, who made coffee, and who drank it without contributing, who had pictures of dogs on their desks, and who had pictures of kids. He kept mostly to himself, not unfriendly, just contained. He had not made a friend at that job, not really, but he knew Clara Hayes. Everybody knew Clara Hayes in the way, the weather or the building's fire exit by presence and function. She was the senior operations manager, which meant she ran the workflows that everyone else fed into. She was precise without being cold, direct without being harsh. She wore her hair pinned up and usually had a coffee cup in her hand and a kind of stillness about her that made people lower their voices around her without quite knowing why. She and Darius interacted maybe twice a week, status updates, process flags, emails that were always professionally worded and always replied to within 20 minutes. He did not know her birthday or whether she had siblings or what she did on weekends. That was fine. That was the arrangement. He drove to work through streets where the snow plows hadn't reached yet. Parked on the third level of the garage where it was coldest and started the day. Clara Hayes had gotten up at 5:15, not because she was an early riser by nature, but because her phone had rung at 5:12, and when she saw it was the memory care facility on North Dearborn, her stomach had already known. "She's fine," the night nurse had said quickly, because Clara always needed to hear that first. She had a difficult night. She was asking for someone named Margaret and became distressed when no one could help her. "Margaret is her sister," Clara said. "She died in 1987. "I see. We wanted you to know. Thank you. Yes. Thank you." She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark after she hung up. The apartment was very clean and very quiet. She had done that deliberately, kept it clean, the way you keep a room when you need at least one thing in your life to be organized. Books lined by color on the shelf. Kitchen counters empty except for the coffee machine and a small clay pot her mother had made in a ceramics class 15 years ago before everything had started to go. The pot was lopsided. Her mother had laughed about it, called it her masterpiece. "It has character," she'd said, "perfectly imperfect." Clara touched the rim of it sometimes when she stood at the counter waiting for coffee to brew. Her mother's name was Patricia, 68 years old, diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's 14 months ago. The progression had been faster than the doctors initially projected. 3 months ago, Patricia had moved into the memory care unit on North Dearborn because Clara could no longer manage the overnight episodes alone, while also maintaining any semblance of a functioning life. She still felt guilty about that. She expected she always would. She got dressed in the dark the way she'd gotten practiced at black trousers, gray blouse, the blazer that made her look more composed than she felt. She did her hair without turning on the bathroom light because the bathroom light was very bright and the morning was still very fragile. She made coffee, drank half of it, standing at the window, watching the snowfall on the street below. She thought Marge died before I was born. Mom has been grieving her for 30 years, and now she's grieving her again like it's new each time. She finished her coffee. She went to work. At work, she was, as always, Clara Hayes. She ran the 9 stand-up with clean efficiency. She flagged a data discrepancy in the quarterly report before it became someone else's problem. She answered 43 emails. She ate lunch at her desk salad, leftover pasta, a bottle of water, and made 3 calls and attended a 2-hour planning session in the afternoon where she said the right things and pushed back on the right proposals. No one knew anything was wrong. That was the system she had built, a version of herself that was always ready for the room. She had built it so thoroughly that sometimes she wasn't sure how to turn it off. She did not have many close friends, a few people from college who called occasionally, a neighbor she waved to, a coworker named Diane who sometimes suggested drinks after work, and to whom Clara usually said, "Next week," until next week never came. She liked Darius Mitchell in the remote, professional way she liked most people who did their jobs without causing drama. He was quiet. He caught errors. He did not gossip or take credit or send emails at 11 at night to prove he was working. She appreciated that. She had thought about it no further. On a Tuesday in the second week of January, she left the office at 5:30 and drove to the memory care facility. Her mother was having a good day, relatively. She recognized Clara's face, even if she seemed uncertain of the name that went with it. They sat together in the common room and watched the snow through the wide windows, and Patricia talked about a man she'd once known in Cincinnati who made beautiful furniture by hand. And Clara said, "Tell me more," and meant it. When she left at 7:30, her mother had looked at her with sudden clarity and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." "I'm okay, Mom." "You're always okay." Patricia tilted her head. "Who takes care of you?" Clara drove 3 blocks before she had to pull over. She sat in the car in the dark on a side street she didn't know the name of, and the snow fell very quietly around her. and she pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and let herself fall apart for exactly 6 minutes, which was the longest she allowed herself. Then she wiped her eyes. She pulled back onto the road. She was hungry. She realized she hadn't eaten dinner. She turned on her blinker and pulled into the parking lot of the first place with lights on. It was a cafe called Elm & Co., which she had passed 100 times and never entered. The windows were fogged from the inside. The sign in the door said open in hand-painted letters. She sat in her car for a moment looking at it. She went in. The cafe was small and warm and smelled like coffee and cardamom and something baking in the back. Cinnamon rolls. She'd find out later. Because Thursdays were cinnamon roll days, which was a fact she would come to know well. Clara found a small table near the window and sat down. She ordered a chamomile tea because the waitress offered it gently. The way you offer something to a person who looks like they've been in the cold too long. She wrapped both hands around the mug when it came. The snow fell outside the window. She was not going to cry. She had already cried in the car, and then she was crying anyway quietly, the way adults cry in public when they've run out of resources, not sobs. Just a slow leaking, eyes down, shoulders drawn in. She was dabbing at her face with a napkin when she heard the door open behind her, letting in a brief gust of cold air, and she turned toward the window so that whoever had come in would not see. She heard footsteps. They stopped. She kept her face angled away. "I'm sorry," said a voice. "I just didn't want to pretend I didn't see you." She turned. Darius Mitchell was standing 3 feet away, coat still on, knit cap in his hand, looking at her with an expression that was not pity. It was something more honest than pity. It was the look of someone who recognized something. Clara stared at him. She did not know what she expected him to do. Make an excuse to leave, pretend he'd said something different, retreat to a table on the other side of the cafe. Those would have all been reasonable, normal, even. He said, "I can go, if you'd rather." She heard herself say, "You don't have to." She did not know where that came from. He sat down across from her, and he did not ask if she was okay because clearly she was not okay. And he seemed to understand that asking the obvious question was not the same as actually seeing someone. He ordered a coffee when the waitress came by, and he set his cap on the table between them, and he said nothing for a moment. The quiet was not uncomfortable. That surprised her. "I didn't know you came here," she said eventually. "I don't usually. My shift ended early. Nia is at dance class. My daughter, she's 6. He paused. "She's very invested in penguins right now." Clara made a sound that was almost a laugh. Just almost. He looked at her, not pushing, just present. And because she was tired, and because he had not pretended, and because something in her had been under pressure for a very long time, she told him. Not everything, not the whole unspooling history of the past 14 months, but enough. Her mother, the diagnosis, the nights, the facility on North Dearborn, tonight, the car, the 6 minutes of falling apart. She asked me who takes care of me. Darius was quiet. Then, that's a hard question. She won't remember asking it. "You will?" Clara looked at her tea. "Yes. I'm sorry," he said. Not the reflexive social sorry, the kind that meant I hear the weight of what you just put down. "I don't usually," she started. "I don't talk about it." "I know. How do you know?" He considered. "Because I also don't talk about it. Whatever it is." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I think people who are carrying things alone start to look a certain way. Not sad exactly, more like very organized. Like they've had to be for so long that they can't turn it off anymore." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter's mother?" she asked. "She left 3 years ago. She's in Portland. She's fine. Nia's fine. He paused. "Working on fine. Does it get easier?" "Some parts do." He thought about it. Other parts just become familiar. They sat together in the warm cafe while the snow pressed against the glass, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was one of the most honest hours Clara could remember having in a very long time. She had not intended to tell him any of it. She was not, by disposition, someone who disclosed. She had a therapist she saw every 3 weeks, a careful woman named Dr. Wentworth, who wore reading glasses on a chain and kept a box of tissues positioned within reach at all times. And she told things to Dr. Wentworth in the structured, bounded way you tell things when you know the session ends at the hour. That was the appropriate container for disclosure. This was a cafe table and Darius Mitchell from work and an accident. And yet there was something in the way he'd sat down without announcement, without drama, just choosing to be there, that had undone something she'd had buttoned up for months. He hadn't offered solutions. He hadn't made the concerned face. He hadn't said, "Let me know if there's anything I can do," which was the thing people said when they meant, "I hope you indicate that there is nothing I need to do." He had just been present. Actually present, the way a room is present. Surrounding, steady, not requiring anything in return. The worst part, she said at some point after the tea had gone lukewarm, is the remembering. He waited. She forgets. That's the disease. That's what happens. And there's no cruelty in it. It's just chemistry and neurons and time. But I remember everything. She looked at the steam rising from her mug. I remember the way she laughed. I remember her voice before it got quieter. I remember the trip we took to Savannah when I was 12 and she got us lost and we ended up eating dinner at someone's birthday party because the host thought we looked like we needed to be there. She stopped. She would tell that story every few years with the same laugh each time. Does she still tell it? She hasn't told it in 6 months. Clara was quiet. That's the last story I remember her telling the way she used to tell stories. Darius looked at her and his expression was not pity. It was the face of someone who was calculating the weight of a thing and finding it genuinely heavy. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "You mean that?" "I do." She believed him. That was the strange part. She believed him the way you believe weather. Not because you've analyzed it, but because it simply presents itself as real. "You mentioned your daughter's mother," she said. "We don't have to. I told you about my mother. That seems like an unequal ledger." He smiled at that, not warmly, but with recognition. The look of someone who appreciated precision. He told her. Not the whole of it, but the shape. 3 years of trying to save something that had already been making a decision without him. The particular grief of a marriage ending slowly. The way you keep asking if it's over and receiving ambiguous answers until one day the answer is unambiguous. Rochelle in Portland. The custody arrangement that was technically shared and practically wasn't, because Nia had needed school and stability and a home that didn't change every other week. "I don't blame her," he said. "I don't think she's a bad person. She was honest when she finally was, which is more than some people manage." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "But there was a long time where I thought if I'd done something different, if I'd seen it coming, He stopped. "You learn eventually that some things aren't problems you failed to solve. They're just outcomes." "Do you really believe that?" He considered. "Most days." He looked up. "Some days I still stay up too late thinking about what I should have done differently." "Me too," she said. "About a lot of things. That's not necessarily bad. It just means you care. Or that I can't let things go. Sometimes those are the same thing," he said. The cafe had gotten quieter. The Thursday regulars had mostly cleared out. The woman behind the counter was wiping down the espresso machine with the particular efficiency of someone who was nearly done for the day. Darius glanced at his watch. "I need to pick up Nia in 20 minutes. "I know." She paused. "I'm glad you sat down." "Me too." He put his cap back on, picked up his coat from the back of the chair. "Clara." He said her name the way people say names when they want to mark a moment. "If you don't have to be okay, not around me." She looked at him. "I know that's an odd thing to say, but I mean it." He shrugged a little awkwardly, which made it more honest. "You can just be what you actually are. I'm not fragile about it." She thought about the version of herself she maintained, the one that was always ready for the room. "Thank you," she said. He left. The door let in a gust of cold. She sat for another 10 minutes alone with her lukewarm tea in the snow outside and the faint smell of the cinnamon rolls they'd already sold out of. She thought about nothing in particular and everything at once, which was a feeling she almost recognized as peace. It started the way things start when they are quiet and real, slowly, with small gestures that cost very little and mean everything. The next morning, a Thursday, Darius arrived at the office with 2 coffees, his and one he'd grabbed from the cart in the lobby. He set it on Clara's desk without announcement on top of the folder she was about to open and said, "It's the dark roast. I didn't know how you took it, so I got it black and brought a handful of those sugar packets." She looked at the coffee, then at him. "Thank you," she said. He was already walking back to his desk. She drank it black. It went on like that. It was not a seismic shift. There were no grand declarations, no long walks in the snow on purpose. They just began to notice each other in the small ways you notice someone when you've stopped pretending they're background. He noticed that she kept the clay pot on her desk now, the lopsided one from her mother's ceramics class. She had brought it to work sometime in January, maybe because having it near felt necessary, or maybe because she needed something to look at when the day got difficult. She noticed that he kept Nia's drawings in the corner of his monitor, held up with small pieces of tape, 4 or 5 layered over each other in an ever-changing rotation. Penguins, mostly, a house with a large yellow sun, a dog they did not own, for Daddy signed in block letters at the bottom of each one. They started eating lunch at the same time, not together exactly. Not at first, but in adjacent proximity in the break room, where they'd exchange small exchanges about the day, about the weather, about the peculiar behavior of the building's temperamental printer. One afternoon, she mentioned that her mother had, on a recent visit, become very engaged by a nature documentary about Arctic birds. Darius's expression shifted. Nia would tell her everything about penguins. Your daughter knows everything about penguins. More than I do, which is saying something because I've watched 4 penguin documentaries in the past month, he paused. I now know that male emperor penguins incubate the egg on their feet for 2 months in 80 degrees wind, Clara said very seriously. That's extraordinary. It is. They don't eat the whole time. Just standing there in the dark, protecting something. Yeah. He looked at her, just standing there. She looked away first. The text messages started the week after. Nothing significant, practical questions at first about a shared project, and then something shifted into personal territory, so gradually that neither of them could have named the exact moment it happened. Did you get home safe? The roads looked bad on the news. I did. The Civic is more resilient than it appears. How was the visit today? She knew my name. It was a good day. I'm glad. Those 3 words, I'm glad, were not complicated. They were not poetry, but they arrived on Clara's phone at 8:47 inches the evening after she'd driven home through slush and let herself into the quiet apartment and stood for a moment in the kitchen, not quite sure what to do with herself, and they were exactly enough. Nia met Clara on a Saturday that had not been planned. Darius had mentioned when Clara asked about his weekend that he was taking Nia to the Natural History Museum, specifically the penguin exhibit, which was temporary and would only be there through February. Clara had said, "That sounds wonderful in the way people say things they mean to be polite, but end up meaning genuinely," he had said after a brief pause. "You could come if you wanted. It would not be a date. It would be a trip to see penguins, just penguins. Very educational." She had said yes. She met them at the museum entrance at 11. Nia was wearing a coat with a penguin patch on the sleeve. She sewed it on herself, Darius told Clara quietly, with assistance from a YouTube tutorial and a great deal of determination. Nia looked at Clara with the frank assessment that only small children and very honest adults can manage. "You're Clara?" she said. "I am." My dad said, "You're his friend, from work." "That's right." Nia considered this. "He doesn't have many friends." Darius made a sound. "That's okay," Clara said. "Neither do I." Nia nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer, and held out her hand. Not to shake it, just to hold. Clara took it without thinking, and they walked through the museum entrance together, and it felt so normal that Clara almost stopped walking for a moment to notice how unusual that was. The penguin exhibit was small and dark and cold, glass-walled, with a group of humbled penguins waddling around a simulated rocky shoreline. Nia pressed her face to the glass and narrated everything she saw. Clara stood behind her and listened. Darius stood beside Clara. "That one," Nia said, pressing her finger against the glass, "is trying to be important, but the other ones don't care." "He's very confident," Clara agreed. "Confidence isn't always a good reason," Nia said, with the severity of someone who had thought about this. Clara looked over at Darius. He was already smiling. They ate lunch in the museum cafe afterward. Grilled cheese for Nia, soup for the adults. Nia told them everything she knew about emperor penguins, which was significant, and then asked Clara about her job, and then asked whether Clara's mother was nice. Clara was quiet for a moment. "She's very nice," she said. "She's sick right now, but she's very nice." Nia said, "When my grandma was sick, My dad used to bring her flowers even though she couldn't smell them anymore because he said the color was good. Darius was looking at his soup. That's a beautiful thing to do, Clara said. She liked yellow, Nia said. Yellow is the warmest color. Clara thought about the lopsided pot her mother had made, the way it sat on her desk and made the whole workspace feel less like a workspace. I think you're right, she said. On the drive home, Darius had offered to drop her since the cold had turned sharp again and the train seemed unappealing. Nia fell asleep in the back seat with her hat still on, mouth slightly open, one hand curled around the small stuffed penguin she'd apparently brought in her coat pocket and not mentioned until they were in the car. Clara watched the city move past outside the window. She was not a person who was accustomed to this. Being taken somewhere, being dropped off, having the logistics handled by someone else's hand. She had been the one who made plans. She had been the architect of her own transportation and her own schedule and her own meals and her own everything for long enough that sitting in someone else's passenger seat felt strangely like being abroad in a country she'd always heard about but never visited. It was not uncomfortable. That surprised her. She's extraordinary, she said. Darius kept his eyes on the road. She is. She asks very direct questions. Always. I apologize. Don't. Clara paused. She asked the same thing my mother asked. What's that? Who takes care of you? She said it quietly. She didn't use those words, but that's what she was asking. Darius said nothing. The heat in the car was just starting to work properly. The kind of warmth that arrives slowly, coming up from the floor. I haven't had a good answer to that, Clara said. Most people don't, he said. The ones who should be asking themselves. I mean, the ones who spend so much time making sure everyone else is okay that they forget they're allowed to need things too. She looked at him sideways. Is that what you do? He was quiet for a moment. I used to. I got better at it when I realized Nia was watching. He signaled, merged lanes. Kids notice everything. If I modeled never ask for help as the correct way to be a person, that's what she'd carry with her. So I've been trying. He paused. Still trying. Calling my brother when things are bad. Letting Nia's teacher know when we've had a rough week. Accepting the casserole from the neighbor even when it's excessive. He glanced over briefly. And occasionally sitting down with someone who's crying in a cafe instead of pretending I didn't see. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not dramatically, not like a breaking, more like a settling. Something finding the place it had been looking for. He pulled up to her building and put the car in park, and they sat for a moment in the way you sit when a conversation isn't quite finished. You don't have to have an answer, he said. To what? To the question. She understood what he meant. Who takes care of you? He was telling her she didn't have to have solved it already, that it was okay to still be working on it. She opened the car door, let the cold in. Good night, Darius. Good night. She closed the door. She stood on the sidewalk and watched until the Civic turned at the corner and disappeared. The streetlights were coming on. The snow had started again, fine and light, like it was deciding. She thought, I don't know what this is, but I'm not afraid of it. That was new. February arrived with the particular cruelty of a month that is short and offers no warmth in exchange for its brevity. Patricia had a fall. Nothing serious. A stumble in the hallway, caught by a staff member before it became something worse. But the incident triggered a care review, and Clara spent 2 evenings meeting with the facility's care coordinator, going over medication adjustments, behavioral patterns, escalating confusion episodes. She took notes on her laptop in a way that was very organized and very efficient. And the care coordinator said gently at the end of the second meeting, "You don't have to be the expert in the room, Miss Hayes. We're here to help." Clara had nodded and thanked her and driven home and stood in the kitchen for a long time without knowing what she was doing in the kitchen. She stopped responding to Darius's messages. Not all of them, 1 or 2 briefly, but the easy back and forth they'd built through January felt quiet, and she knew she was responsible for it. And she knew why, even if naming it felt complicated. She was getting close to him. Close in the way that cost something, that required you to have something to give. And the closer she got to anyone, the more visible she became. The less she could rely on the version of herself that was always ready for the room. She thought about her mother saying, "Who takes care of you?" And she thought about Nia in the back seat with her penguin. And she thought about the clay pot on her desk. And she thought, I can't do this. Not right now. Maybe not at all. She started taking a different route to the kitchen to avoid walking past Darius's desk. She scheduled her lunch at a different time. She replied to his project emails promptly and professionally and said nothing else. The discipline required to do this surprised her. She had been keeping people at a distance for years since her mother's diagnosis. Really, and if she was honest, longer than that. She was practiced at it. The mechanisms were in place. Be warm, but not intimate. Be collegial, but not confiding. Be present in the ways that function requires, and absent in the ways that cost something. She had not realized until now how much she had stopped wanting to use those mechanisms with him. That realization frightened her more than the grief did. Grief she knew. She had a system for grief. Process in the car. Maintain in public. Continue. She had been running that system for 14 months, and it worked more or less the way all systems work when you have no alternative. What she didn't have a system for was this. The sensation of a person becoming necessary. The way Darius had entered her peripheral vision, and then gradually her center, without either of them having made a deliberate decision about it. The way Nia called her by name like it was a given fact. The way the apartment felt different when she came home, now not empty in the old neutral way, but empty in a way that noted the absence of something specific. She did not know what to do with necessary. She had been self-sufficient for so long that needing something had started to feel like a character defect. One Thursday morning, she came in, and there was a coffee on her desk, dark roast, handful of sugar packets on the side. She looked at it for a long time. She did not go to say thank you. She drank it, and she felt worse for having done it. 2 days later, she passed him in the hallway, and he looked at her with an expression that was not accusatory, not hurt in a sharp way, just quiet, like he understood something and was waiting. "Clara," he said. "I have a meeting," she said. She did have a meeting. That was true. She went to the meeting and sat through it and answered questions and said nothing about the fact that she was barely keeping herself together. And when it was over, she went back to her desk and the coffee cup was still there, cold now, and she pressed her fingertips to the side of it. She thought about what the care coordinator had said. You don't have to be the expert in the room. She had been the expert in the room for so long, she had forgotten there were other options. That evening, the facility called again. Not an emergency, just a check-in. Patricia had been asking about the man who fixes the street and wanted to know when he was coming back. The staff just wanted Clara to know in case she had context. Clara sat in the parking garage of her building for 20 minutes. She didn't cry this time. She was too tired for crying. She took out her phone. She looked at Darius's last message, which was 5 days old. Just checking in, no pressure. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat. She thought it would be easier if I'd never walked into that cafe. She thought that's not true. The message Darius sent 8 days into the silence was 4 words. I'm here. That's all. Clara read it at 11:30 at night, sitting in the chair by her bedroom window with a blanket pulled up and the city moving quietly below. She read it several times. She did not reply, but something changed. She could not have explained it precisely. The message did not solve anything. It did not remove the exhaustion, or simplify the situation with her mother, or answer the question of what she had the capacity to offer another person. It did not do any of those large necessary things. What it did was stay. That was the difference. She realized most things in her life were asking her to perform or produce or manage or be okay. The people in her life, even the kind ones, tended to wait until she indicated she had room for them. They respected her boundaries, which she had drawn so firmly that sometimes they functioned less like boundaries and more like walls. Darius's message did not wait to be invited. It did not require anything from her. It was just a presence sitting in her phone saying, I am not going anywhere. She thought about the penguins, the ones on the outside of the huddle facing the cold, the ones who bore the exposure so the others could be warm, and how the system worked not because any single penguin was heroic, but because they took turns. No one had to carry it alone the whole time. She had been on the outside of the huddle for 14 months. Longer, she had been out there voluntarily, telling herself it was the responsible arrangement, telling herself that asking to come inside was an imposition, telling herself she was fine. Fine. Her mother had said, "You're always okay." She pulled the blanket tighter. She thought about what had happened precisely since that cafe, how she had told him things she hadn't told anyone, not because he had asked the right questions or offered the right reassurances, but because he had simply not pretended. He had seen her and named it and sat down. And in sitting down, he had made sitting down feel like a normal thing to do, not an admission of defeat, just a human act. She thought about the way Nia had taken her hand at the museum. Not tentative, not asking permission, just, "You are here, so I will hold your hand." As if Clara's presence were already a given, as if she already belonged. She had spent years making sure she did not impose herself on people's lives. And here was a 6-year-old who had simply decided without asking that Clara was someone worth holding on to. She fell asleep in the chair, which she had not done in months. The real unguarded kind of sleep, not the monitoring kind. In the morning, she texted him, "Thank you for the coffees. I'm sorry I've been quiet." He replied, "Don't apologize. Are you okay?" She thought about that for a moment, considered her habitual answer, the "I'm fine," the working on it, the brisk reassurance that cost nothing and revealed nothing. "I'm working on okay," she wrote instead. He sent back, "I know that place." She laughed, just quietly, just to herself in the kitchen with her coffee and the lopsided clay pot and the winter light coming through the window. She texted back, "I know you do. That helps, actually." "Good," he wrote. "That's what it's for." December arrived the way it does in Chicago, without announcement and without mercy. Snow arriving 3 days before calendar winter. Temperatures dropping like something had forgotten to stop. Nia had been lobbying for a real Christmas tree since October. Darius had maintained that the artificial tree in the hall closet was perfectly serviceable and also already assembled. Nia had argued with the measured persistence of a child who had inherited her father's stubbornness that artificial trees did not smell like Christmas, and therefore defeated the entire purpose. He got the real tree. It leaned slightly to the left. Nia declared this added character. They had been spending time together, the three of them, in the gradual, unpressured way that had come to define things between Darius and Clara. Dinners that started as practical. Darius had made too much soup. Would she come eat some? And became regular. Saturday mornings that Nia now sometimes called our Saturdays, with the casual ownership of a child who has decided something is hers. A warmth building in Clara's life that she kept waiting to feel afraid of, and mostly just felt grateful for instead. The calls from the facility increased in December. Patricia's confusion deepened with the season. The lights and sounds and disrupted routines of the holiday were harder to process, and she became more distressed in the evenings. Clara visited every 2 days and stayed longer, sitting in the common room while the staff ran holiday activities that Patricia watched with the pleasant distance of someone watching a film in a language they half understood. On Christmas Eve, Clara got to the facility at 2:00 the afternoon. Patricia was having a hard day. Not dangerous, not critical, just lost. She kept asking about her sister Marge, the same as always, and she kept looking toward the door as if expecting someone who was not coming, and eventually she had drifted into a restless sleep in her chair by the window. Clara sat across from her and watched her sleep. The facility was warm and quiet. They had put tinsel on the nurse's station and a small tree in the corner of the common room. Christmas music played softly from somewhere, something instrumental, a carol she didn't quite recognize. She had told Darius that morning, "I'll be at the facility tonight. Don't change any plans on my account," he had said. "Okay, let me know how she is." She watched her mother sleep for a long time. She thought about Christmases when she was young, her mother in the kitchen, cinnamon and orange peel, the particular way Patricia laughed when something genuinely surprised her, full body and unself-conscious. She thought about all the things she had not said over the past 14 months because saying them made them more real, and she had been managing real for so long that any addition felt impossible. She was thinking about going home. The facility was closing the common room to visitors at 8, and it was almost 7:30 when she heard the door. She turned. Darius was standing in the doorway. He had Nia with him. Nia was wearing her coat with the penguin patch and carrying a small paper bag and looking around the room with the wide, careful attention she gave to new places. Claudia stared at him. "You said not to change plans," he said. "I didn't change plans. This was the plan." She did not have a response to that. He walked in and sat down in the chair beside hers, and Nia came around and very gently put the paper bag on the table near Patricia's resting hand. Inside, Clara would see later, was a small bunch of yellow flowers, the kind you find at grocery store florists in the winter. Sunflowers. Yellow is the warmest color, Nia did not say anything for a while. She sat beside Clara and looked at the sleeping woman, and then she reached out and patted Clara's hand twice, very matter-of-factly, and went back to looking out the window at the snow. Clara felt the thing that had been tight in her chest for months. The vigilance, the bracing, the endless readiness for the room, loosened just slightly, like a hinge that had been forced closed for too long and was finally permitted to move. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Darius very quietly put his arm around her shoulders. Not a grand gesture, not a declaration, just a weight, a warmth. She leaned into it. They stayed until 8 when the staff began quietly letting people know the common room was closing. Patricia woke once briefly and looked at the small group with an expression of pleasant confusion, and her eyes settled on the sunflowers and she said, "They are bright." "Yes," Clara said. "Did someone bring them?" Patricia looked at Darius, then at Nia, then at Clara. She didn't say who they were or seem certain that she knew, but she smiled. "You have nice friends," she said to Clara. "I do," Clara said. The snow in the second February was not the same as the snow in the first one. This was not a meteorological statement. The snow was more or less the same, gray and fine, and Chicago relentless. But Darius experienced it differently. The way you experience a season differently once you have a different place to come home to. Not physically in this case, but somewhere. He had not said the thing he was thinking of saying. He had thought about saying it in December, standing outside the memory care facility while Clara talked to the night nurse before they left. Nia, half asleep against his shoulder. He had thought about it in January during one of their Saturday mornings when Nia was at a birthday party and he and Clara had sat at his kitchen table with coffee and talked for 3 hours about things that weren't urgent or practical, but just interesting. Her mother's life before the diagnosis, his childhood in Indiana, the year he'd spent trying to learn guitar badly, the small things that had shaped them. He didn't say it because it didn't feel like the right moment. And he had learned enough by this point in his life to understand that the right moment for something true is not always the loudest moment. Sometimes it's a quiet one. The quiet one came on a Tuesday evening in February. Nia was in bed. Clara had come for dinner. She did this 2 or 3 times a week now without ceremony, sometimes bringing things. A bottle of wine once, apples twice. A library book she'd thought Nia would like. And they were washing dishes side by side, which was a domestic choreography they had arrived at without planning. He handed her a bowl. She dried it. He said, "I don't need perfect." She looked at him. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know there's a lot. Your mom and everything that's going to keep changing. And I know you spent a long time not needing anyone to be in it with you." He handed her a glass. "But I'd like to be in it with you. Not to fix it, just to be there." He paused. "I just need you. Not a version of you that has it together. Just you." She was quiet for a moment. The water ran in the sink. Somewhere down the hall, Nia's nightlight made a faint orange glow under the bedroom door. Clara set down the dish towel. "I think I loved you from the cafe," she said. Not loudly, not dramatically, like something that had been true for a long time was simply done being quiet about it. He reached over and turned off the faucet. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him that first night. Not performing anything, not managing anything, just present. He said, "I think I almost walked away." "I'm glad you didn't." "Me too." He put his hand over hers on the counter and she turned her hand over so their fingers were linked and they stood like that in the kitchen for a while, long enough for the dishwater to cool. Long enough for Nia to call out, half asleep, "Dad." And he called back, "I'm here, baby." And Nia went quiet and they stayed. There is nothing cinematic about a Tuesday morning in January. The alarm goes off. You get up. The light is gray. The city is cold. Darius's alarm went off at 5:45. Same as always. He lay still for a moment. Beside him, Clara slept on her side with her arm folded beneath her pillow, the way she always did. The morning was quiet. He got up. He heated water for oatmeal. He packed 3 lunches, his and Naya's and Clara's, because she invariably forgot to eat otherwise, which was something he had appointed himself responsible for without a formal discussion. He went down the hall to Nia's room, same as ever. Arms flung wide, dark curls spread across the pillow. The stuffed penguin, not the small one from her pocket, but the large one she'd received at Christmas, which she'd named Gerald for reasons she had not explained, tucked under one arm. On Nia's desk, a new drawing. She had taken to leaving him drawings lately. little dispatches from whatever was occupying her mind. This one showed 3 figures in the snow: a tall one, a medium one, a small one, standing around something round and lumpy that might have been a snowman. Underneath, in her careful block letters, "Our family." He stood there for a moment, then he went to wake her up. She came awake in stages as always. 1 eye, 2 eyes. The protest, the negotiation. "Oatmeal," he said. "Brown sugar." She sat up, looked at him, looked at the door. "Is Clara up?" she asked. "Not yet. Can I wake her up?" "Be gentle." She scooted off the bed with considerable velocity and went down the hall, and he heard her knock. She always knocked. He had taught her this, and she was faithful to it. And then he heard the murmur of Clara's voice, and then Nia's voice saying something about Gerald, and then laughter. He stood in the kitchen. The overhead light flickered once as the heat kicked on. He was still going to fix that. Clara came into the kitchen with her hair down, wearing a sweater of his that she had commandeered without comment sometime in December, and showed no intention of returning. She looked at the coffee he'd already made and then at him. "Thank you," she said. "It's black." "I know. You always get it black. You've never asked for anything else." "I know." She picked up the mug. "I like that. You know." He didn't say anything. He handed her a spoon for her oatmeal and she took it. Nia came barreling back into the kitchen with Gerald under her arm and a story already in progress about something that had happened in a dream involving a penguin and a very unreliable elevator. Clara listened with complete seriousness and asked relevant follow-up questions. Darius watched them. The gray light at the window, the flickering light overhead, the steam from the oatmeal. He had not expected this. Not because he had stopped hoping for it exactly. Hope was a complicated thing to stop doing, but because somewhere in the long middle years of managing and surviving and keeping Nia okay, he had let the expectation of it go. He had decided that this was fine, that a life could be full and good without this particular thing. He had not been wrong about that. He had just been incomplete. Clara caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. He shook his head. "Nothing. You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The quiet thing. Where you're thinking something and you decide not to say it." He considered. "I was thinking that I'm glad the cafe was open." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved in her expression. Not a performance, just the real thing. "Me too," she said. Nia looked between them. "What cafe?" "The one where your dad and I met," Clara said. "I thought you met at work." "We met at work," Darius said, "but we met at a cafe." Nia absorbed this with the mild interest of someone who finds adult distinctions slightly inefficient. "Were there cinnamon rolls?" "There were." "That's good," she said. "I think important things should happen near cinnamon rolls." Clara pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. He did not try. "That's what I think about now when I think about that winter. Not the big moments, though those mattered. Not the words in the kitchen or the Christmas Eve in the memory care facility or any of the particular days that stand out now like photographs. I think about the small architecture of it, the way a life gets built from small decisions, to not walk away, to say one honest thing, to keep showing up, even when you know what it costs to be seen, to be a black single dad in a city that can make a man feel invisible and still choose tenderness anyway. Patricia is doing okay. She has good days and hard days, and on the good days, she knows Clara's name and calls her sweetheart. And on the hard days, she talks about people who've been gone for decades as if they've just stepped out of the room. Clara still feels guilty about things she shouldn't feel guilty about. She's working on it. We're working on it together, which is different from working on it alone in ways that are hard to describe, but easy to feel. Nia got a new penguin book for her birthday. She is now at 7, an authority on 17 species. The overhead light in the kitchen is fixed. The Civic finally gave out in November, and I replaced it with something 3 years newer that starts on the first try, which still feels like a small miracle every morning. And the cafe, Elm & Co., with its hand-painted open sign and its cardamom smell and its Thursday cinnamon rolls, is still there. We go sometimes, the 3 of us, on weekends when there's nowhere to be. Nia gets hot chocolate, Clara gets chamomile, I get coffee, dark roast. We don't always talk about important things. Mostly we talk about small things. The week, Nia's school, a book Clara is reading, something strange that happened at the office. Whether Gerald the penguin deserves a sequel stuffed animal. The snow comes. The city keeps moving. It is not a perfect life. It is a warm one. And I have learned, or relearned, the way you relearn things, that life temporarily convinces you are optional, that warmth is not a thing you find. It is a thing you build one honest moment at a time.